All right, here we go. So this is going to be part 4 of this series on how you build a website. Again, my goal here is to kind of not necessarily have you build one line for line from scratch, but we'll get into using some drag and drop builders that make it easy to lay things out. But I want you to know like what's behind the website, how do you tweak things to make them look the way you want. And something that you really got to know about is what is a div. So in the first websites I showed you, let me see if I pull one of these up. One of these first ones I showed you had tables to lay everything out. So like if we went over to this thing, everything was laid out with tables. Now that's like old school, and look what happens. Like, oh, that page sucks because it's 2016, not 1999. And we need stuff that will respond if we're on like a mobile device or if I have different size screens. So there's a lot of reasons to not use tables, and that's just one of them. So what they use now are things called divs. Now, I feel like this is a topic that I wish I was better at teaching, to be completely like honest about it. I wish I was better at teaching this, but I'm going to do my best. So let's look at this PowerPoint file that I made, okay? And let me, this thing is in the way here, so let's zoom out a little bit. And what I made over here is, this is an example of a div, okay? And I've color-coded it. So let's picture the entire blue section as the div, okay? So this is like a cell in a table maybe. We're going to call this a div. And then my text is in the middle, right? So you notice, though, that I've got this space around my text. And actually, we'll make it even. It's probably more like this. So what's going on is here we have a div, which is this blue section, but our text only takes up a certain part of it. So what we call all this space between the outside of our div and the beginning of our writing is this is all padding. Right, so this is like the cushion on the inside of our div that separates our text from our div. And you can see, just like a table, I can have a div that's got like a border. So that's me like changing the size and thickness of the border. Or we don't even need to have a border. And then the outside, the green, is the margin. So we've got a div, which is blue, which has padding, right? So the padding kind of pushes our text into a smaller space, and then on the outside we have the margin. So that if we were just kind of laying things out and we had two divs, these would not be able to bump into each other generally. Like generally speaking, we can overwrite things however we want. But this would be like the layout of a div. If we don't want a margin, we don't have to include a margin. In fact, we don't even need to have any padding. We could just have two divs, so like let's take this over here and take this over here. We don't have to have any margins or padding. We could just put this stuff, right next to each other if we wanted. There's no reason why we need to have paddings and need to have margins, but that's just kind of like the basic layout of how this stuff would look. Now to get more into divs, again, think of them kind of like cells within a table. And you can have divs inside of divs inside of divs, like nested. That's really common. But one of the reasons why these are nicer than, let's go over here, these are nicer than tables is because of a lot of this formatting that we can do. So let me move my picture up here. A lot of this stuff, you can lay out the position that you want your div to fill. So the most interesting, I guess you could say, is down here, fixed position. So this is a div. You don't have to call the div fixed. Okay, you could call whatever the hell you want. So remember we talked about classes. This is a class that this guy called fixed. You could call it anything you want, but what's important is his position is fixed. And down here in the bottom right, you can see div with a class that he called fixed. Again, I don't like that he called it fixed, because that's kind of redundant and confusing. But the point is that it's fixed. It stays to the bottom all the time. So this is like his CSS, and he even said, all right, the width of my div is 200 pixels. It's 0 pixels from the right of the screen, 0 pixels from the bottom. The background color is white. and the position is fixed. So all this styling he has here applies to this div that he made. So that's pretty cool, right? Now another thing you can do with divs is relative. So here we go. We've got two divs. One of them is got a class of relative. And remember, an ID is something that only shows up once, and you use a hashtag. A class is something that you can use more times, and you use the period. So we've got a div class relative 1, div class relative 2. So over here, we've got the CSS, position relative, and now what he's got one positioned relative to the other. So on the top, he's got negative 200 pixels, so that's 200 pixels down from the top. 20 pixels from the left, background color of white, width of 500 pixels. So that's like a cool way that now, tables, you can't do that, or you can't do that with tables, but with divs, you can start laying things on top of each other and do really cool stuff. And again, you can have divs inside of divs. The traditional thing is static, so this is a div static. This is, it's not positioned really. There's nothing, you're not doing anything cool with it. You almost might as well be using tables, and that's the default value, is static. And then you can go down here, and absolute is like, it's like fixed, but you're doing things relative to the other. So here you go. This is absolutely positioned relative to this one. So it's fixed in this position relative to this one. It gets a little bit more confusing when you get into that, but that's kind of the idea of divs. They're different from tables. They're used a ton, and because they're used so much, I wish that I was a little better at teaching it and had like way more to show you. But while we're on this topic, let me show you something cool. If you're ever looking for like the right terminology for anything, so like you could see here position. You're like, oh man, what are the different options for position? So if you go to Google and you just type in CSS position, almost always the first thing that comes up is w3schools.com, and they have some really cool stuff. So if you click on any of their links, it'll say like, here are the 4 things that you can set for position. And they even often have some little examples. So this is a pretty good resource. Like, okay, they got absolute inside that, so this is overlapping elements. So one thing you can do is a Z index. So if you've got things overlapping, you can say like, I want to make sure this one is on top. You could do that. Comes up sometimes, but this is a really good resource. Even if I'm like looking, I'm like, oh man, like, what are the different options for font sizes? All right, so I can go here, CSS, font size property, and it'll tell you like you can use font sizes, you can use percentages, you can use labels like small, medium, large, percentages. Like this is a really good resource for CSS callouts. Even to remember that it's called font-size. Like you might be stuck in thinking, oh, it's font. I mean, that's maybe not the best idea, but like let's say I'm like, oh, I want to have padding on my div, right? So then you go in CSS padding, and like boom, here you go, padding -top. If you only want to assign one of them, so kind of, and you could also use percentages. So percentages are great instead of pixels because percentages help you be responsive when your screen size changes. Because if you use a percentage of your screen, then it's going to adapt depending on the size of the screen. So that's like, in here you don't actually need to call them out one by one, top, right, bottom, left. You could just do one call out. So this would be a paragraph that has padding on it. So it doesn't need to be just a div when, for padding stuff. And yeah, I guess that's an important thing to remark, that when you're using these terms like padding, margins, and all that, you can apply it to P, like a paragraph. You could apply it to A for an anchor, for like a link. So if you look at like menus, so let me pull up a menu really quickly of retire. So this is a website that I was working on a little bit. Some woman who's a realtor is making a website, and I helped to build the menus. So like you can see here, okay, there's divs here, right? So it looks like, oh, you've got divs, and you've got text inside the divs. Well, the other way to do it is just say, without using a div, just say I've got a link and give me some padding around my link. So I don't necessarily need to use a div here. I could just put a link with text and say, give me some padding around it, give me a background. And then in the corner where it's rounded, I say, give me a border with a radius. So there's different ways to do it, but divs are especially used to lay out big things, and I don't want you to get confused when you see div. Think of it a little bit like tables. But yeah, that's enough for this video. We're going to move on to the next one, which is going to be editing CSS. So again, almost like a lot of the time, you've already got this website that you kind of took from either a page builder or a template or a theme or something, and you want to start like editing things. So that's like very like engineering, right? You take something that's already built and you start tweaking it. So I'll get into that in the next video.